and particularly the design of feature openers, which is probably my favorite part about being a magazine designer, is being able to create visual statements on story openers. And the reason you can create a visual statement is because an opener has really very few components, and this one has actually probably the maximum number of components you would ever have on a feature opener, and it still makes a pretty dramatic statement. So what this has is, in this case, what a magazine designer would call a kicker, something to categorize the story. It has a byline. It has a headline, of course, and it has a deck, and it has the beginning of the story, and just a little bit of the text of this story. The goal with most feature openers is not to overwhelm the reader with a lot of text, and a lot of feature openers don't have any text at all. It becomes sort of a billboard or an advertisement almost for the story, and it uses these elements, or in this case, a kind of cunning combination of words and image, to draw a reader into the text. Now, I should say, let's go back to that for just a second, that this is, in terms of design, and I tend to talk about design strategies. In terms of strategy for organization of this spread, this follows what I call the 50-50 strategy. In essence, the headline is on one side, on the text side, and the picture is on the other. And that gives the reader something of value and something of visual interest to look at both sides. And it's, it gets boring if you always have all your text on one side and your picture on the other side, and that's all you ever do. But for one feature, and that's what most people are doing for this, is class is a perfectly legitimate strategy to keep your story organized and to keep your spread organized. I have seen cases where people put both their picture and the headline on the one side, and then the other side is just sort of banked down with text. You will see that sometimes in print, but if you put all your goodies on one page like that, it just means that this page here becomes a really drab one. Now, within the 50-50, went too far that time. Within the 50-50 spread, there's a lot of room for variety. Just because text is on one side and images on the other doesn't mean you can't have a colored background. It doesn't mean your picture can be very different or treated differently. It doesn't mean you can't do something different with your text. This does not start the story. This is just the headline and deck and some author information. Also, Esquire. It can be an opportunity to do something dramatic with your type. It also can be an opportunity to create your type offline, either with paints or with a drawing tablet or actually constructed. And I will show you a lot of spreads where the type is not just type. This is kind of a fun one with the painted Z. For Jay-Z, and also the picture of Z gets painted into and removed. So 50-50 spread, but it's using white space in an unusual way. Kind of a 50-50 spread, fat profits. Headline made out of food and eaten up burger. And if you have a story that you can you can make the headline out of French fries. Why not make the headline out of French fries? It can be a way to do something different and engage the reader. Now, I've been referring to these as 50-50 spreads, but that doesn't mean they're always exactly 50-50. This one, and this is probably the most common thing you see, takes the photo more than all the way across the fold. You can see the fold is right there in the middle. And this one happens to start the text on the opener, but the text is a deviation from the body copy. It's a little bit bigger and a little bit more aired out, and that's perfectly fine for a first paragraph to make that part of the display type on a feature. In this case, the byline is above the headline. I think that's just more of a decorative element. It's not because that information is particularly interesting to a reader. And the byline, or rather the deck, is on the photo on the other page. Also, because it's a 50-50 spread, doesn't mean it has to be limited to one photo, as this one has that kind of nice little second one. Another spread that does that, 50-50 basically, but the picture comes across the spread. This is Bon Appetit Magazine, and this was a period where they were going through food photography that was still beautiful but in process or being eaten. It's not most food photography is just sort of gorgeous and doesn't talk about what food is actually used for, but this is kind of an aftermath scene, which is a bit provocative. And it's possible to go the other way. This spread has a picture that's actually less than half of the spread, and this caption you can see is just on the other side of the fold, and that's you see that less frequently, but that's also a perfectly legitimate approach to the 50-50 spread. Other approaches to feature openers are exploring rhythm. This is kind of a neat one, and kind of a nice custom calligraphic approach with the type in the fish and this rhythm of fish across the spread. This one from Fast Company. This one's quite old at this point, but this explores rhythm in another way through a more literal grid and then breaking that grid up into larger units, and the headline itself becomes incorporated into the grid. This would be, I think, a nice strategy if you had a lot of photos, but they weren't particularly great photos. A way of bringing them and bringing those photos and making them interesting. Sometimes opener could be basically or almost all photograph. Here's an example of just the big photograph and headline, with some vector elements sort of moved in behind. Another all picture. This spread happens to be the opener of what I call a visual feature in this class, and I'll be talking more about that in a week or so. But it's also just basically a big picture opener, and then, like as with cover design, where this picture leaves you, room for type is where the type goes. The picture becomes kind of the grid for something like this. This is not a traditionally great photograph with that harsh, distracting shadow, but it does provide the look for this feature on subsequent pages. Features can also be an opportunity for the openers to go really, really big with type. And this is about as big as you can make type, or almost as big as you can make type, and have it functional in a magazine. Another example of big type being treated almost like art, sort of bleeding off the edge, just like the photograph is bleeding off the edge of the page. Now, the other part of feature design, and this is, I should warn you, Reader's Digest, so the type is going to look a little bit bigger on my screen because Reader's Digest is just a small-size magazine. But the other part of feature design is keeping the momentum going after the opener. And if you go to my Pinterest page, you'll see a bunch of examples of that. For this lecture, I'm just going to look at this one. So this is basically a headline deck, no text, along with credit information. But this style of opener creates a motif that gets used throughout this. And that's important so that a reader knows that they are in this feature, that they have not switched to something else, but they are still in that feature. So in this case, it's using fairly big words, the same sort of calligraphic or hand-drawn style, and that's being used in the photograph, and it's also being used on the text page. And then here we go again with that same handwriting and approach to photography. The photographer who took all the photos for this is the same. That's not necessarily a luxury a student has. Or if you commission an illustrator to do the opener, you might well commission that illustrator to do what are called spot or subsequent illustrations after that. And that helps bring this feature as it gives it its own brand within the magazine, and it gives it a style that you can use that throughout that feature.